Now, if you manage to complete the challenge from the last lesson, then this should be the effect that you now have. When you press on one of these buttons, so the soft button, the countdown timer should start from 300, medium starts from 420, and hard starts from 720. So now if I press on the soft button, you'll see that I'm getting a countdown timer that fires every second, counting down the amount of time that my egg still has to cook. Now, if you haven't got this effect or you don't know what I'm talking about, then you might have missed out on the last lesson, which was a challenge lesson. So be sure to complete the challenge so that we can actually move on. Now, if you have completed the challenge, then I want to go through the code that I've got and you can compare it to yours as well. So the first thing that we did was we converted our minutes to seconds because we're going to be counting down every second. And then we created a variable called seconds remaining to keep track of how many seconds there are. And then when the user selected the hardness that they wanted, we assigned the value in our egg times dictionary, so be it 300, 420, or 720, to the variable seconds remaining. So at this point, seconds remaining now equals one of these values. The next thing we do is we create a timer. So this timer code you would have found probably from Stack Overflow or Googling around, but essentially it has a bunch of parameters in it. So it asks you for how often do you want the timer to fire. So in our case, because we want our timer to update every second, then we've set that as 1.0, so 1.0 seconds. And then we've got a parameter for whether if we want our timer to repeat. So we don't want it just to stop after the first second. So we've set that as true. And then we've got this parameter called selector. And the selector is a bit of a remnant from the olden days where we used to create things using Objective-C. So the way that we use it is we provide a name of a function. So it's almost like it calls this function that we put in here every single second, every time the timer fires. Now, when you created this function called update timer, you might have gotten an error that has a little white dot in it. And it says that selectors come from Objective-C. So in order to expose this method or make this method work with Objective-C timers, then you have to add that little annotation, the @Objective-C in front. So that's all it is, and we don't really need to understand how the timer works or how a selector works. The goal of the challenge was to get you just comfortable with finding out how to do things through searching and through using the 5-step method to just make it do what you want it to do. And in later lessons, as we get better at Swift and as we learn more programming, then these small things will become more and more clear to us. So here we have a function called update timer, which we know will fire every second. In here, we're checking to make sure that we've still got time on the clock, so seconds remaining is larger than 0. And if so, we're going to print the number of seconds that we currently have remaining, and then we're going to -1 from it, so that the next time our timer fires, we'll be printing a second that's 1 lower from before. So this is essentially how we've achieved this timer mechanism. But if you've been testing it carefully, you will notice that if you start out pressing one button, so the one that should start at 300, and then midway you change your mind and you press a different button, now our timer seems to have sped up. It's actually running down the seconds almost 2 seconds in one go. So it's doubling its speed. And if we press another one, then it's going to speed up even more. It's now 3 times as fast as before. So what's going on here? Well, the reason is because we create this timer, but we never actually cancel it. We never stop it. So it's the same timer that's running. And every time we press one of the buttons, we create a new timer and we call this method every second. So now we're calling this method twice a second or 3 times a second, depending on how many times we've pressed this hardness selected IB action. So how can we prevent this from happening? Well, we could create a variable called timer and set it equal to a timer. And then down here, we assign that timer variable a new piece of data, which is the actual scheduled timer. But every single time that the button, the soft, medium, or hard buttons get pressed, we actually invalidate our timer. So we stop it and cancel it so that the next time we create a timer, we actually create a brand new one. So now if we run our app and we press one of the buttons, you can see it's counting down 1 second every second of the clock. And if I change to a different button, it will still count down once per second instead of speeding up like before. Now, here's another challenge for you. How can we change the label that's currently on our main.storyboard? So the one here where it says, how do you like your eggs? How can we make it say done once our timer is up? So in order to make it easier to test your code, I recommend changing these egg times from 300 seconds, where you have to wait a whole 5 minutes, back down to 3 and 4 and 7. This way, when you're testing it, it's much, much faster. Pause the video and try to see if you can make the code change the title label to make it say done once our timer is up. All right, first things first, we need an outlet to be able to change this label. So right up here, let's control drag it over, and I'm going to call it just a title label. And hit enter. So now we're actually able to change our title label, and we're going to do it right here. So here we have an if statement that checks if the seconds remaining is greater than 0, then continue ticking along. But if the seconds remaining was in fact equal to 0, so not greater than 0, well, then we could capture that with an else statement. So we add the else statement, and when this happens, we first invalidate our timer. So we run our timer.invalidate again to stop the timer from continuing to tick every second. And plus, on top of that, we tap into our title label.text property and we make it say done. So now if we run our app, and I'm going to select the soft button, and you'll see my timer goes 3, 2, 1, done. So that's exactly what we wanted. All right, so now that we've got our timer functionality down, the next step is to add a progress bar. So that's what we're going to do in the next lesson. So I'll see you there.